How's it going, Dopamon fans? We are back to recap. I, I looked at draft recap. I'm like, we're not really
We are back.
recapping.
What are we doing?
I don't. I tried to give myself an idea from the title, and I'm like, wait.
We're here to talk about the winners and losers
Yeah, right.
of the draft.
I should new graphic, whatever. I should spend 5 minutes making it. But now that I have not, I am too lazy to make another.
Okay.
How's it going, Dopamon fans? The NHL Draft for 2023 is over, and if you haven't already, go check out our recaps. We streamed it as well. Compare how good our mock drafts were. We have all that on the channel. We're Dopamon, two best friends talking hockey. Here today, right now, this video is about winners and losers of the draft. Some teams did better than others. We have our tier list here on screen for you, and we determine winners and losers not just by who got the best player necessarily, but which teams did the best to get the best value for their team. For instance, the Chicago Blackhawks did not, in my opinion, win this draft. They won the draft lottery, they won the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, but to win this draft to us comes down to scouting, picking the best guy available, making that move. And so that's our tier list. And at the top, I think the St. Louis Blues take it.
Yeah, St. Louis Blues had an amazing draft. And like we said, Connor Bedard, best player in the draft. Hands down, no question. Chicago, overall, we want to take everything into account. So don't get mad when Chicago is not in the top here. We're trying to figure out which teams did well with the picks that they were given, that they had to deal with, that they moved up or not. And St. Louis, to me, one of the best in this draft, with Dalibor Dvorsky, Otto Stenberg, and Theo Lindstein in the first round. Great picks, and then still being able to take a guy like Quentin Burns, Jakob Stankel, Paul Fisher, all these guys in just good value picks in the late rounds as well. Not only just having 3 first-round picks, which are obviously the biggest ones we'll talk about here. We'll start with Dalibor Dvorsky.
And he is the perfect mold, in our opinion, for the St. Louis Blues. We both had him at 10th overall in our mock drafts just because he fits their style of play. I feel like as, the type of, the way they rotate lines, he's going to be a guy that will compete for that kind of first line minutes. Will he get it? Maybe not, but that'll give him a lot of motivation. And behind him, Otto Stenberg.
Yeah, Otto Stenberg, they've got their top 2 potential centers of the future here. And Dalibor Dvorsky and Otto Stenberg maybe ends up being 2 and 3, but the center depth on St. Louis is incredible now, and as well as a strong defensive prospect here in Theo Lindstein from the SHL, and picking all guys out of Sweden. So not just Swedish guys. Dvorsky is obviously Slovakian, but out of the Swedish league, and you see again they actually take another Czech player out of the Swedish league later in the draft. So they had a lot of scouts in Sweden, I think, this year, and came out with some really good picks.
So they are our winner. And then moving on, Arizona. They did have a lot of picks, and, there's a little bit of an argument to be made for some of them, but I think that overall, they had an incredible draft. At the top, Dmitry Simashev, who arguably is the best defenseman in this draft. I think so. I also give credit to David Reinbacher, who is, second best, tied for first, however you want to look at it. They got a solid defender that they don't have to worry about the development of because he's already so well developed. He's already NHL really ready, to be honest. And after that, Daniel Butt, a little bit of a reach, a little bit of a pet project, a lot of work on him, but incredible upside. I think Arizona can take a little bit of a risk, just given the amount of prospects they are able.
And they had so many picks.
So many.
They had so many picks. They were one of the best draft winners just on the quantity of their picks, let alone the quality that they ended up taking in some of these mid picks. Noel Nord, we talked about a little bit in our recap video. We didn't talk about Vadim Moros, but I know we both kind of like him from the KHL.
Justin Kipke's another guy.
Justin Kipke's another guy. Great player.
Skipped over Jonathan Castagna. I think that a lot of the high school, the CAHS kids are just going to get overlooked. There's so much potential here And Arizona's really, I feel like, getting a lot of value out of these later picks as well, not just in the first 2 rounds.
Next, I think would be Pittsburgh, and I don't think these are in any particular order. We have the tier in B. I know I'm
No,
looking at
actually,
it.
I
Can't
put
see my
yeah.
mouse, but you put B in order.
No, B's not in order, but the S and A are in
Oh,
order.
S and A are in order. So okay, so we'll start with we'll go to Pittsburgh here. This was Dubas's first draft as a Penguin, so who knows how much influence he had over the picks themselves. Generally, the scouting department for that team is already established, So, but he might have had a little bit of influence there. But they got the player that I think, were really looking forward to drafting in Braden Yeager.
Yeah, he's the big piece. He's the one they wanted, and they got him. And I think that's huge for him, huge for Kyle Dubas, huge for Pittsburgh as a team that hasn't picked in the first round a lot in the last 15 years. So it's good for them to be building high-end prospects, and Yeager's the first of, hopefully many, but he's the first in a long time. And I also think that they've gotten value on their later picks. I think in the 5th round, Mikhail Ilyin, he's out of Russia, very underscouted. I feel like this is a guy that Dubas maybe carried with him from his scouting in Toronto, because Toronto has in the past drafted really well out of Russia, a little bit of sleeper picks. Ilyan's a guy who way off on scouts' radars, and I think he absolutely has potential to be an NHL player, as well as a guy like Emil Yarventi in the 7th round. He can rip the puck. He can score so well. A lot of Finns I felt like in this draft class, including Kalle Kangas falling on the defenseman after him. There's a lot of guys from Finland who were expected to go much higher in the draft and expected to have much higher potential, and I think that it's absolutely there. And these 2 guys at the end, I feel Pittsburgh picked, are those guys with incredibly high upside despite being in the 7th round.
Who's next here on your board is Vegas.
The Vegas Golden Knights, who only had 4 draft picks this year.
I got there.
First one, obviously the last one in the first round, because they got the honor of hoisting the cup. David Enstrom, a big 6'3" center. You know that the upside there isn't the highest, but his floor is incredibly high too. He's going to be an NHL player. He's going to be a solid piece down the middle. And for Vegas, a team that's traded away a lot of their prospects, developing one that you don't have to be worried about. You can look at your prospect pool and say, look, we have a good one in Edstrom. I think that carries a lot of value. And then the other 3 picks, 2 third-round picks to get Matthew Cataford, one of the highest rated, in my opinion, QMJHL players. I absolutely love him. I think he will translate to the NHL level. R2 Karki, I mentioned earlier, and Thomas Urinen, 2 Finns, 2 who were expected to go much higher and didn't have great seasons. And then there's a lot of high reward, high risk. I feel like that just is perfect for Vegas's prospect pool. And if you ask me, with 4 picks at 32, 77, 96, 192 to get incredible, they just got
great
incredible value. Right?
Only 4 picks, but they made those picks count.
They really did. Absolutely. And I like that they have a balance here too. Edstrom, he's a guy that can't miss. Cataford, he's also a bit safer, and then Karki and Urinen, higher risk, high reward. They have a perfect balance, and they're really adding to their prospect pool. They're a team. I think this is a win.
Carolina, I believe, is next on your board, right?
Yeah, Carolina. The next 2 are a little bit more of a fringe. I feel like Carolina, they're a team that they had a lot of draft picks, and a lot of these players kind of just fell to them. Obviously, Bradley Nadeau, I don't think that was a reach. That was a good pick. He probably could have gone 35th. It wasn't going to draw up much further than that. That was a good pick. They're going to get the best out of them, but it really comes in the later rounds. Jaden Perron fell to them. Alexander Rykov fell to them. Timur Mukanov fell to them. These are guys who are great. They should have gone in the 2nd, 3rd round. Carolina said, "Hey, if you're gonna sleep on them, we'll take them."
Yeah.
And so part of it, I feel like it's on them. It's a win, but also it's kind of like the dumb luck for everybody else. Just said no, and they're like, "Okay, I'll take it if you're gonna pass on this great offer."
Yeah, absolutely. A great draft. They had a lot of picks. Had way more picks than I thought they did going into the draft. A couple in 4, 5, and 6 that they made really count, getting both Timur Mukanov and Michael Emerson solid pickups overall.
And it kind of reminds me of like, EA NHL games where they're drafting these guys and then they'll trade a few of them to get more of these picks to draft more of these guys. They're doing a really good job drafting. Carolina fans, you got to be proud. Got to be happy of what's going on in the future because it's not often winning teams are drafting elite talent. Because usually the whole point, you win, draft lower, and they're getting great value out of the draft.
Absolutely. And I did it in the wrong order, actually, from
Oops.
your tier list, but that's
whatever.
fine. Now, the Columbus Blue Jackets, who had the benefit of Adam Fantilli dropping to them, which I don't think they expected.
Not at all.
And it's going to take me a long time to remember that Adam Fantilli is not an Anaheim Duck, because I was just thinking that was what was going to happen.
I think
so
we
in
all
the future, it's going to take me a second to remember that he is a Blue Jacket. But they also got Gavin Brindley, William Whitelaw, Luca Pinelli, Andrew Strathman. They got and Tyler Peddle as the last pick of the draft, who they traded in for. Didn't originally have that pick. They gave next year's 7th to Vegas so they could trade in.
And it's worth noting, Gavin Brindley and Adam Fantilli are line mates. Chemistry is, I feel like GMs are realizing that chemistry for these young kids especially is more and more important. And coming in, whether or not they end up on the same line at the NHL playing long term, just coming into the NHL, it's going to make both so much, it's going to make their ride in so much easier. They're both going to perform that much better.
And I'm just realizing, too, William Whitelaw and Andrew Strathman both play for the Youngstown Phantoms.
Oh, yeah.
So, again, they're picking 4 straight Americans, 4 straight teammates on 2 different teams.
And they were my
Luca
top
Pinelli,
ranked out of
too.
the USHL, both of them. Top forward, top D, Strathman and Whitelaw. Whitelaw is a motor. This man can fly. He's a little bit small. Don't know if his style of play fully translates to the NHL, but just his level of skill and intensity, you can't pass on that.
Now to the bottom of your list. And we'll start, unfortunately, I think here, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Putting in your C tier. I don't know if I'd... Yeah, they're in my C tier.
Yeah.
They're in my C tier, unfortunately.
And this isn't, with all due respect, this is not a discredit towards Easton Cowan.
No. I think I kept calling him Ethan Cowan in the last video. Easton Cowan, great player, but I think if you're looking at this draft as a whole, you have to consider this as bad asset management.
Absolutely.
At the forefront. And Hudson Malinowski and Noah Chadwick, I'll do a little bit more of a video on them. All 3 Canadians, all 3 from the CHL. I just think they could have gotten more especially at pick at 28. Even if they didn't trade down, could have gotten a little player with a little more higher upside, and they would have found their way into the B tier of this. I think, I don't know. It just, I don't know. This didn't stand out as a very good draft.
Yeah, we said at the very beginning, we rank on the value you're getting in your draft pick, and the Toronto Maple Leafs lost value here. And obviously, even when you're going into the 5th and 6th, I like Noah Chadwick. It's hard for a defensive defenseman, especially in the later rounds. It's always something you just kind of have to throw a bone at. But Hudson Malinowski, an AJHL kind of guy, he's
for the Brooks Bandits.
For the Brooks Bandits, he's an above ager too. So I kind of expected more out of him. He didn't really stand out to me as an above ager. I was hoping for like 20, double the goals from him, and he didn't. So there must be something that Toronto loves, 'cause I feel like this is a huge miss. There were a few names in the 5th round that I thought were a little bit better, some higher upside, especially if you only have 3 picks. I just talked about, you look at a team like Carolina, they're another winning team. How many draft picks, and they made them count. And I feel like Toronto maybe didn't. And then you look at what they, compare that in the later rounds. They didn't make the few that they had count. They didn't make the first one count. I feel like this is a little bit of a miss for them. They're the top of my losers.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how many picks they had. They only had 3 selections.
And it makes it hard.
They couldn't do anything to get more selections. That kind of bumps it down the list.
And then when we compare to Vegas, who had 4, I feel like they did, obviously 2/3, but
way more with a small amount of picks.
And I'd like to see more from Toronto that I feel historically has drafted very well. This is kind of a miss. Conversely, Vancouver, next on our list here, who drafting at 11, Tom Willander, great pick.
Yeah, that's a top. It's a top 15 pick. We're not gonna single out that guy, but it's the rest of their draft.
And it's easy, to pick. When you're in the top 10 to 15, these guys are good. This isn't where scouting is an issue. You don't have to worry, is Tom Willander a good defenseman? Yes. Like, your scouting department, that does not make your scouting department good to say, yes, a top 10 guy's a top 10 guy. It's really the rest of it, and I feel like that's where Vancouver really fell. I like Hunter Brstevich, or Brzustevich, not sure how to pronounce it, but after that, I felt like the value kind of falls. Sawyer Minio, another miss. Tyler Mueller, a miss. Like, these guys, there's a lot of value that we see that other teams were picking up on that I feel like Vancouver was just kind of reaching on these guys, and this is not a team that can afford to be taking risks in the draft. Tom Willander, perfect example of how they should be drafting, and then the rest of it kind of just falls flat for me.
Continuing on with the Boston Bruins. And I'll get them up here in a second.
And this is another case where maybe they're strapped for not having enough picks. There are a bunch of late ones, but I still feel like, just given the fact that they're another team that's aging, they're trying to, what's their future? I think they really need to bolster up on prospects, and they left a little bit of value on the draft board for Boston. There's a bunch of names we're looking at for Vegas, for instance, what they were pulling. Compared to Boston, I think that this is not the time for them to be reaching, and they did. Are these guys going to reach the NHL? Maybe these guys are long-term development, but I feel like Boston should have done a little bit better.
Yeah, maybe the only name that I could consider being a good pick here is Ryan Walsh. In the 6th round, that seems like a decent upside to me. But overall, yeah, it's just doesn't jump off the page as a very good draft for the Boston Bruins, who historically have been very good with drafts, I think.
50-50. Yeah. Sometimes you look at like 2015 and they missed 3 times in a row. But then, they get some value somewhere.
That was a big L.
They're an odd team for drafting, and this was a year I feel like they played so well during the season that their postseason fail. They need to respond with an off-season goal. They needed something big here to say, don't worry, guys. If you're the outlook for the team, you're worried. Everybody's aging that much older. Team's not getting better. Here's proof the team is getting better, and I don't think with this draft we're seeing more talent coming into the Boston Bruins than is coming out right now. I think we're looking at a little bit of a decline in the end of the Boston Bruins if this kind of drafting kind of keeps up for the next few years.
Absolutely. But I think we can both agree the Montreal Canadiens are a little bit of a mess.
And
this year?
Not for David Reinbacher, so shut up. The fifth overall pick was the only draft pick, in my opinion, that was the right one. 5. Remember, if you're a Habs fan, you're mad about Matvei Michkov. 5 other teams also passed on the second best player in the draft.
Yeah,
you're not the only team.
And there is a little bit to be said about Michkov, and it might not be a good fit in Montreal. So let's assume that he isn't the pick. So even if you want to debate the difference between Reinbacher and Leonard or another defenseman, Wallinder, or whatever you want, but Reinbacher, I think, was definitely the right call. But the rest of these, I think, the first thing that jumps out to me, there's 2 things that jump out to me, but 3 goaltenders is strange. I don't know if another team did this. I didn't count. No. But I feel like they got Jacob Fowler in the 3rd round after a bunch of goalies were taken in the 2nd round.
And they worried, and it was a panic.
Kind of forced a goalie. I like Jacob Fowler. I don't know if I would have picked him here. I would have gone somewhere else into the 5th round. And there are tons of other goalies, and they ended up taking more goalies. Right? So they're really looking for a goaltender, and they're trying to force that issue. And the other thing that kind of sticks out like sore thumb is Florian Jacki.
Yeah, if that name rings a bell, Montreal fans, yeah, that's Arbor Jacki's brother, younger brother, smaller, not as mean, and not exactly a top prospect in this
No,
year's draft.
the
This
name only.
this could have been saved for the seventh round. This could have been saved for a tryout after the fact, because Florian Chekai, there was zero risk of another team drafting him. I don't think, at least.
I that's not what I've heard.
No, and
after the fact, I think a lot of teams are surprised that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone went, "Oh, cool, it's his brother. That's neat." Moved
right,
on.
and then a few minutes later, they're like, wait, look at all the picks that Montreal has. The prospect pool. They're in a rebuild. David Reinbacher, an example of, look, the guys they're picking, they need these guys to come in soon. They're really hoping, and they're passing on guys to take Florian Chekai. What an absolute waste of a pick. A rebuilding team should not be wasting picks.
Yeah, and taking a flyer on a guy like Luke Middlestat late too is kind of fun. Like,
yeah,
neat, but like that's
Very
where
neat.
you take flyers on picks, and I don't know. If they'd taken Florian Jackeye with that seventh and taken, I don't know if he'd gone already, but Perron,
Jaden
was
Perron,
97 or something like that. They could have, I don't know if they could have packaged 101 and 128
Alexander
and moved into the
Rykov.
80s or 90s.
Alexander Rykov would have been a great pick right there.
Right? They need good players, and they just shot a lot of bullets aimlessly, I think. And I don't know. It looks a little bit messy. And we could, Florian Jackeye could be the best player in that, the greatest brother duo since the Gretzkys, for all I know. But, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what's going on? But just from the outset, Montreal, I think, loses the draft.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with their first round pick. Usually, the top 10, 15, it's so easy to draft these guys. They're already so good.
I'll do that.
It really doesn't impact how, when we see whether they win or lose. It's really the asset management. You looked at Toronto, poor asset management. That's what bit them. That kind of puts them against the rest. There's a few teams in here that did better than others, but Montreal really at the bottom. I feel like they missed on the most. They gave up in these later rounds. As a team that's rebuilding, this is not the time to be taking Florian Chekai at all.
Yeah, and yeah, those are our winners and losers. I think we should have actually made a tier above S and just said Connor Bedard.
Yeah,
and then put Chicago there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Chicago, I think, had a pretty good draft. I think Minnesota had an interesting draft, but again, good and bad things to it. Taking a guy like Charlie Stramel with 21 is a little interesting, but could work out really well.
I think Seattle took good guys. Edward
good
Chalet is a great example of a guy who can maybe build their character for the future.
I might reconsider putting Philadelphia into the A tier.
Because Michkov fell to them.
Michkov fell to them. A couple of guys fell to them, and they took that opportunity.
And I wasn't as impressed with Detroit, given the value they had. I feel like the later rounds they missed as well, even if they got a pretty good first round.
Yeah, Detroit would be on like the lower end of the B tier. I don't think it'd sneak into C.
And that's why I didn't put. Obviously on the graphic you see B. This tier is in no particular order. I kind of just lumped the guys in where I felt like a lot of teams did this year. A lot of teams really did just pick the guys they wanted. Edmonton Oilers had 1 second-round pick, only pick in the first 4 rounds. They get Bo Eki. They get the guy they wanted. I can't call that a win or a lose. That's just perfectly average.
Yeah.
And
perfectly
it's
where he
sure,
should have been.
right. And that's a lot of the teams just got guys who were just good. They got the guys they wanted. So I don't think there's as big and clear of that divide or parity in the winners losers, but right at the top and right at the bottom, I think is a clear winner. St. Louis Blues with some really good picks, clearly fits into their mold, clearly fit guys that I think are going to be NHL core roster players, and at the bottom, Montreal, because what are you guys doing?
Yeah. And also wanted to point out, Alex made this list, so the Ottawa Senators are comfortably in B tier.
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the Ottawa Senators whatsoever.
Well, their first pick was in the 5th round, and Hoyt Stanley was actually good value. He was
not bad there,
ranked in the 80 to 100. He goes 100 and something. If you only get 3 late round picks, Ottawa just did whatever. They got the one that mattered in Hoyt Stanley. Other than that, whatever. And that's a perfect example of what I mean by a team They just got the guy they wanted.
They
right?
had a day.
You had an average draft, and that's most teams this draft. But St. Louis Blues fans be very happy about this draft. Montreal Canadiens fans, do not be upset about David Reinbacher. That's the last thing of this draft you should be focusing on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Even if you took someone else, even if you took Matvei Michkov, you'd probably still be in the C or D tier.
Yes, absolutely.
So this isn't David Reinbacher's fault. If anything, he's saving it. But yeah, that's it for us. Let us know what you think, where we're wrong, why we're wrong, who you think had a good or a bad day at the draft yesterday. Yeah, we're
Dopamon, two best friends, love to talk hockey news, analysis. We love to cover the draft. We have, go check out our mock draft, see how wrong we were. Go look at our, can go see the actual live stream. If you have
draft
8
recap,
hours.
we got stuff to do. We got stuff on the channel for you if you like draft content. Thanks so much for watching.